Question: was Homo erectus a very early hominid or actually a robust human after Noah's flood?
Homo erectus. Well, Homo erectus fits in within the sort of human span of variation. The term hominid is rather confusing because it's used by the evolutionists as a fancy term for an ape man. But the skulls that are classified as Homo erectus do tend to have smaller brains than the modern day average, but they are still within the range span for human brains. The few skeletons we have where they have enough of the skeleton to actually see the body proportions and the overall stance, again, fit within the human range.
One thing to add there, Craig and Joe and Diane, all the skulls we have from Homo erectus are post-Noah's flood,
Yes.
right? They are not pre-Noah's flood at all. Joe, you got any comment on that?
Yeah, that's where I was going to mention next. They're all post-flood, so even though many of these are fossils, they're post-flood fossils. And if you think about it, you have evidence not only of degeneration within humans, but you also have evidence of degeneration because of changing climate and adaptation to climates, right? And we see this even within populations today, when you get a population that for a generation or two generations have been mostly starving, right? Their bodies shrink and they get smaller and smaller, and their children get smaller because they're not as well, as well nourished. Thank you. But then they move to a better place, right, as immigrants or whatever, and their kids grow up being well nourished, and as a result, their children are back to what you could call normal sized again, right? So climate and environment has a lot to do as well with things like sizes of humans and so on.
Oh, we still see that happen. We've seen that happen within the last sort of 50 or 60 years with people from Asia, from war zones in Asia, migrating to Australia. And the original immigrants were, as you say, they were tiny.
Yeah.
But their children who grew up in Australia with a good diet, full of protein, living in a country that's sort of full of sunshine and a good climate. Yes, they're significantly taller and larger than their parents.
Environmental factors will impact on things like size, on things like health, on things like how these people have been able to survive and live. And you've got to remember, being in a post-flood environment, you have both geologically and biblically a picture of good environment, which has gone from good to bad to worse, even after Noah's flood, right? With the coming of the ice and the coming of the deserts and a severe change in climate, making it harder and harder to survive, that's going to have a very difficult impact, or a big impact rather, on the way that people look, on the way that people behave, and what things that people do. So all the proportions tell us that it's a human, but it's a human that has suffered somewhat.
Yes.
If folks want to do some extra looking up on Australia, if you want to compare the size of Aboriginal skulls with one that's been dug up called the Cow Swamp skull, you'll get an idea of the impact of environmental variation. So there's just an extra KOW swamp, not COW swamp. Craig comes from Beauty Point, which is named after a COW, but not a KOW. So there's all sorts of extra research you can do on environmental factors. And we've observed very much, both amongst Aboriginal Australians and the 5 or 6 variations that exist amongst them, the role of diet and climate. And we've seen the same, as Diane said, with migrants from overseas, from countries where they were very low on quality protein and that. And now they have high quality protein like McDonald's. And even that is enough to lift their height and their stature quite a bit.